Boxing is rigged for money. What many still call the noble art is, for others, nothing more than a well-oiled masquerade, and when you look at the billions generated with every major event, it becomes increasingly hard to ignore the question everyone whispers without ever fully stating it out loud. Is boxing rigged for money? For decades, suspicions have surrounded certain fights whose outcomes seem straight out of a movie script, so disconnected they are from any kind of sporting logic. And the problem is that every time a fighter goes down for no clear reason, or a referee stops a bout without an obvious justification, the rumors start again and fans see the invisible hand of a system that values profit over athletic integrity. One of the most famous examples remains the second fight between Muhammad Ali and Sonny Liston in 1965, which was supposed to settle the score after their first encounter, but ended in complete confusion with what became known as the Phantom Punch, a barely visible blow that knocked Liston out in seconds. And since that day, many analysts have claimed the fight was fixed, especially given Liston's ties to organized crime figures such as Frankie Carbo. In the HBO-produced documentary, Assault in the Ring, an incident is exposed that shook the boxing world. Luis Resto was accused of cheating in his fight against Billy Collins Jr., using gloves tampered with to remove the padding, and it's a tragic case where cheating went far beyond score manipulation and became a criminal act that destroyed a career and perhaps even a life, since Collins never recovered and died in a suspicious car crash a year later. The scandal at the 2016 Rio Olympics is further proof that even the amateur elite isn't immune, as an investigation led by Professor Richard McLaren revealed that several fights were manipulated through a system of discrete signals between judges and referees to favor certain countries or athletes deemed financially promising for AIBA, the then governing body of amateur boxing. And examples like this are countless, which makes the concerns of fans about fixed fights all the more legitimate. The A side always wins. In nearly every high-profile bout, there's a phrase that keeps coming up among fans and analysts alike: the infamous A side. And it's not just a nickname, it's a silent reality in modern boxing, where the one who brings in the most money, who sells the tickets and draws the sponsors, is almost always the one with his hand raised at the end, even when he may not deserve it. The A side is the one who enters the ring second, whose name comes first on the poster, and who is looked at with slightly kinder eyes by the judges. And from the days of Floyd Mayweather to today's icons like Canelo Alvarez, Anthony Joshua, or Gervonta Davis, this dominant position has become an absolute power that extends beyond the sporting arena into total control over the fight's environment. Take Canelo's 2014 bout against Erislandy Lara as an example, a technical and close contest in which many observers like Dan Rafael and Teddy Atlas believed Lara had done enough to at least earn a split decision. Yet all three judges awarded the fight to Canelo, and one of them, Levi Martinez, delivered a stunning 117-111 scorecard that instantly triggered a media storm over the blatant favoritism shown to the A side. But the most blatant example is perhaps Floyd Mayweather's fight against Jose Luis Castillo in 2002, a match where, according to CompuBox stats, Castillo landed more total punches, more power shots, and dictated the pace. Yet all three judges gave Mayweather the unanimous decision, a verdict that left fans puzzled and journalists divided, but confirmed one thing: the A side never loses without approval from the men behind the curtain. This mechanism is reinforced by contractual clauses that the A side often imposes, including the venue, the type of gloves, the exact weight at the weigh-in, or even the fight date, and every detail is meticulously crafted to maximize his chances while handicapping the opponent without technically breaking any rules. The dominance of the A side is also seen in pre-arranged trilogies, where the first bout conveniently ends in a controversial decision meant to fuel demand for a lucrative rematch, a strategy perfected over the years by promoters like Eddie Hearn and Bob Arum, and based on one simple principle: if your fighter always wins, even controversially, you can sell the next fight for twice the price. That's why fans no longer trust scorecards or judges' decisions. They know that as long as the A side holds the leverage, it's not the fists that decide the outcome, but the business operating behind the scenes. Mayweather's blueprint ruined. Boxing. In the history of modern boxing, few figures have divided opinion as much as Floyd Mayweather Jr., hailed by some as a genius and condemned by others as a destroyer, because beyond his technical brilliance and unbeaten record, he implemented a model built around preserving that undefeated status at all costs, with that zero in the loss column becoming more valuable than any world title. And that obsession has profoundly reshaped the sport for the generations that followed. Before the Mayweather era, defeats were part of every great champion's journey, whether it was Sugar Ray, Leonard Marvin Hagler, Roberto Duran, or even Muhammad Ali. They all lost, and it never tarnished their legacy. In fact, each comeback was seen as a mark of greatness and resilience. But with Floyd, a new era emerged, one where careers are meticulously crafted, where every opponent is handpicked, and the primary objective is to never lose, even if that means avoiding dangerous fights. Mayweather perfected this system relying on two pillars: timing and promotional control. He always found the right moment to face his opponents, like a young and untested Canelo Alvarez, or a diminished Manny Pacquiao worn down by age and injuries. And through his company Mayweather Promotions, he made sure to control every aspect of the event, from the rules to the weights to the gloves. And for many observers, this opened the door to a version of boxing that is overly calculated and overly protected. The issue is that this model was quickly copied by an entire generation of fighters eager to stay undefeated at all costs, including talents like Gervonta Davis, Jermall Charlo, and even Terence Crawford, who have at times been accused of ducking specific opponents for fear of jeopardizing their flawless records. And this trend has created a climate of frustration for fans who watch major fights being delayed or shelved in the name of so-called career management. Promoters have also embraced this logic, thinking long-term and selling undefeated records as marketing assets to drive ticket sales, subscriptions, and pay-per-views at the expense of the sport itself. And while some argue Floyd merely played smart within an already flawed system, others believe he left behind a legacy far dimmer than what he could have achieved. Weight intimidation creates unfair advantages. In a sport where every kilogram can shift the balance of a fight, one of the most widely shared theories is that some boxers manipulate their weight to intimidate their opponents, and behind the seemingly neutral ritual of official weigh-ins lies a darker art involving extreme weight cutting, followed by strategic rehydration, allowing some fighters to step into the ring several weight classes above their announced limit. Perhaps the most well-known case is that of Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., who fought Sergio Martinez in 2012 after reportedly gaining back nearly 10 kilograms between the weigh-in and the fight. But he's not alone, as names like Gervonta Davis, Teofimo Lopez, and Errol Spence Jr. have all been flagged for appearing massive compared to their opponents on fight night. And in these situations, the physical advantage becomes brutal, impossible to counter in the ring, and often leads to glaring mismatches. The blame doesn't rest solely with the fighters, since current rules allow for this phenomenon by permitting weigh-ins the day before the bout and without strict limits on rehydration. Some boxers exploit this loophole by aggressively shedding water weight using saunas, diuretics, salt restriction, or even fasting before reloading on fluids and electrolytes in the 24 hours that follow. Commissions have sometimes tried to act like the IBF, which enforces a 10-pound rehydration limit the day after weigh-ins. But these rules don't apply across all sanctioning bodies and are easy to circumvent in non-title fights or under different federations, leaving the door open to what is now commonly called weight bullying, a term that gained popularity in the 2000s and 10s to describe fighters who abuse their physical advantage gained through cutting. Some bouts illustrate this perfectly, such as the 2019 clash between Danny Jacobs and Canelo Alvarez, where Jacobs looked like a full-blown heavyweight on fight night, or Devin Haney versus Jorge Linares, where the weight gap was obvious, despite the supposed parity on the scale, and each time fans erupt, accusing promoters of protecting their stars or commissions, of turning a blind eye to dangerous and unfair practices. Canelo always gets favorable scorecards. Among all the theories that circulate in the world of modern boxing, none divides opinion as much as the one claiming that Saul Canelo Alvarez consistently receives favorable scorecards because every time he steps into the ring, regardless of the real outcome of the fight, a portion of fans remains convinced that the judges help him maintain his aura and his place at the top, especially in close or controversial bouts. The most frequently cited case remains his first fight against Gennady Golovkin in 2017, when Judge Adelaide Bird delivered an absurd 118-110 score in favor of Canelo, in what was objectively an extremely close contest and even slightly tilted toward Golovkin, according to many observers, and this single scorecard sent shockwaves through the boxing world because it was enough to prevent an official defeat and reinforce the belief that judges are not impartial when the Mexican star is involved. More recently, his fight against Billy Joe Saunders in 2021 was seen by some as more balanced than reported before the Englishman's injury stoppage. While against John Ryder in 2023, many fans pointed out the exaggerated gap between the official scorecards and the reality of the ring. Yet no judge was sanctioned, no system was reviewed, and Canelo continues to benefit from a near untouchable reputation in the eyes of the commissions. This phenomenon raises legitimate questions about Canelo's economic weight within the ecosystem of modern boxing, because he is the king of pay-per-view in both Mexico and the United States. He draws millions of viewers, and his fights generate immense revenue for broadcasters, promoters, and federations that all benefit from his rise, which leads many to wonder whether losing is even a realistic option for him in the eyes of the judges. This is not necessarily proof of direct corruption, but rather a form of systemic bias in favor of the star. And today, Canelo will always be remembered as a great boxer, but also as the symbol of a modern era where scorecards sometimes seem written before the first punch is even thrown. Corruption. Within sanctioning bodies, in professional boxing, sanctioning bodies are supposed to represent regulation, sporting justice, and the defense of championship integrity. But for many fans, these entities have become the very symbol of an opaque and corrupted system, where titles are sometimes bought, negotiated, or handed out behind the scenes to those who bring in the most money, rather than to those who truly deserve them. Accusations of favoritism and suspicious arrangements are numerous and go back several decades, such as in 2000 when the IBF found itself at the heart of a federal scandal in the United States, after its president Bob Lee was found guilty of accepting bribes from promoters to manipulate rankings and grant title opportunities to fighters who had not legitimately earned them. And that trial shed light on practices that some believe still persist today, though in more discreet forms. The inflation of world titles is also an element that suggests possible corruption, as there are now multiple regular and interim titles that have blurred the very notion of a world champion, to the point where many fans no longer know who the real number one in each division is. And behind this chaos often lies a financial logic where every new belt allows organizations to impose sanctioning fees on promoters and multiply lucrative events. Some observers also point to the questionable closeness between certain federations and powerful promoters, such as Matchroom or Top Rank, who seem at times to receive preferential treatment in the designation of title fights or in the handling of rankings. And this has fueled a kind of cynicism among fans who no longer believe the rankings reflect merit, but instead business relationships and commercial leverage. Old school fighters were tougher. For decades, a passionate theory has circulated within the boxing world claiming that fighters of the past were far tougher and more resilient than those of today. And this myth fuels generational debates, with fans glorifying the real boxing of legends like Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier, or Rocky Marciano, while viewing today's stars with a certain skepticism. This theory partly stems from the idea that older training methods, frequent fights, and a rougher style made past fighters capable of absorbing far more punishment compared to current standards, which tend to favor speed, technique, and defense. And indeed, old school boxing was marked by regular bouts, sometimes multiple times per month, whereas today's champions rarely fight more than 2 or 3 times a year. However, this idea of superior toughness among old-school fighters is now being challenged by modern analyses showing that today's boxing demands extremely high levels of physical and technical preparation and advancements in nutrition, sports science, mental coaching, and medical supervision explain why contemporary athletes are often faster and better protected, which can give the impression that they are less durable, though this does not mean they are less tough. Moreover, the growing awareness of long-term brain damage and stricter rules against dangerous mismatches have reduced the number of spectacular knockouts and helped extend the careers of modern boxers, and the fact that icons like Mike Tyson or Lennox Lewis had to adapt their styles to preserve their health proves that toughness is not just about taking punishment, but also about strategy and intelligence in the ring. So this myth of the old school is partly a form of nostalgia that romanticizes the past while overlooking the extreme and often destructive conditions those older fighters endured, and it mostly fuels heated debates on social media where fans oppose the so-called golden era to today's boxing, often refusing to acknowledge that each era comes with its own set of challenges and unique context. Fury versus Ngannou was rigged for business. The fight between Tyson Fury and Francis Ngannou generated massive anticipation and speculation, but also a controversial theory that continues to circulate. The bout may have been arranged behind the scenes to maximize profits and protect the interests of the promoters. This theory begins with the observation that Fury, an undisputed heavyweight champion, has long avoided certain opponents in favor of fights that guarantee controlled entertainment and strong financial returns, sometimes at the expense of sporting merit, and Ngannou, a former UFC champion turned boxer, brought immense media value, but remained a complete unknown in the world of professional boxing. For some fans and analysts, the flow of the fight with Fury appearing to manage the pace and avoid real exchanges recalled the opaque side of boxing where financial stakes often outweigh the purity of competition, and they suggest that unspoken agreements between teams or promoters may have steered the fight toward a favorable outcome for Fury without anything ever being officially acknowledged. This idea is reinforced by historical precedents in boxing, where fights have clearly been shaped by commercial interests, and the fusion between sport and business is regularly described as a toxic force threatening the integrity of the sport. However, no solid evidence has ever confirmed foul play in Fury versus Ngannou. The fight was overseen by athletic commissions and closely followed by international media, and the lingering skepticism mostly stems from frustrated fans or conspiracy theorists who see every major event as a setup. Nonetheless, this theory sheds light on the complex reality of professional sports, where massive financial stakes, broadcasting rights, and pay-per-view records place enormous pressure on boxers, their teams, and the promoters. And it raises the broader question of how pure the sport really remains in a world where money can blur the lines.